Hi, everybody. I'm Zen Honeycutt of Moms Across America, and I'm very happy to be here today with Dr. Mark Pettus. Hi, Dr. Mark.
Hi, Zen.
And Dr. Pettus is from Functional Formularies. He has been why don't you tell us, you've been a practitioner for how many years?
I've been in practice for 30 years, and my background's in internal medicine, nephrology, kidney specialist, and also integrative medicine. And I spend most of my time looking at holistic approaches to prevention and wellness.
Excellent. We're so glad to have the opportunity to talk to you today because you just did a very important webinar called Understanding Blood Lipids and the Relation to Health. And I'd like to do a recap of that in the next 20 minutes or so for all of the moms, and I hate to say the word layman people, but for people who are not practitioners, health practitioners, but want to understand what is going on with fats, right? There's all kinds of diets that people are trying to manage fats and lower fats and not have reduce the impact on our health. And it's very confusing. And so we'd really like to have this opportunity to explain how can fats impact our health, what should we be looking for, and what's really going on here? Because there's a huge shift that's happening. Would you say that's true?
I think there is a huge shift, Zen, and it is very confusing because for a long time, we've been telling people that low-fat diets, low-fat nutritional principles are what are most healthiest for people because we thought that eating more fat meant having a higher cholesterol, and having a higher cholesterol meant having a higher risk of heart disease or stroke. So it made sense that if you lowered the amount of fat that you took in from your diet, that you would lower your blood cholesterol and therefore lower your risk of heart disease. And as is the case in so many things in medicine, as research evolves, sometimes a very different picture begins to emerge. And that's exactly what's happening in terms of fat.
Yeah, I have to jump in and say, I remember exactly when that happened. I was probably about 10 or 12 years old, and my parents all of a sudden went crazy about cholesterol. They stopped buying eggs. They bought, the fake eggs in the box. They stopped cooking. Well, I was happy my mom stopped cooking liver, but they stopped buying bacon. I mean, our milk all of a sudden became from whole milk that we got either down the street from the farmer that hadn't even homogenized it, pasteurized it. It was, they switched to low fat milk and skim milk. And I was like, what is this? So yes, there was a huge marketing shift to go to low fat, and there might be repercussions of that. And so we're going to talk about how things are changing again. Correct?
And I think there are probably very few families looking back that didn't change their behaviors as a consequence of these public health messages. And I too remember going from whole fat milk to fat-free. Eggs were no longer to be found in our house. And so part of this message, as we discuss this and the time that we have, is that we now realize that good sources of fat, like butter and like eggs, especially the yolks, like olive oil, like nuts, walnuts, almonds, avocados are probably very, very good for us. And unfortunately, most people that embraced the low-fat message, as most people did, replaced those fats with things like margarine, which we now look back on as what we call a trans fat or a hydrogenated fat, extremely dangerous for health. People replaced fat with carbohydrates, most of which took the form of flour, processed, packaged carbohydrates, and foods that were labeled low fat or fat free, which most of us thought meant that's got to be good for me.
Yes.
But those foods largely contain sugar and fructose and flour and lots of preservatives. So we've seen, coincident with the message that you reflected on over the last 40 plus years, a rise in obesity, a rise in diabetes. And though there are many reasons for that, and I know we touched on sort of glyphosate and environmental toxins, an important reason for that, but certainly the low-fat diet has had the unintentional consequence of people substituting healthy fat with poor quality carbohydrates. And we now know that that's probably fueling this epidemic of chronic disease.
Yeah, absolutely. And do want to jump in here for all of our vegan and vegetarian friends too. And for those who want to be wary of, animal products, if you are going to eat animal products, absolutely they need to be organic, grass-fed, pasture-raised. They need to be not raised in a CAFO, which is a confined animal feeding operation, they are completely polluting the planet. There's places in Virginia and Maryland, North Carolina, where their waters are totally toxic because of the chicken, pig, and all kinds of farms which are polluting the planet. So if you are going to eat meat and partake in these particular kinds of fats, please make sure that they are organic and grass-fed, pasture-raised. Now, tell us a little bit more about why wouldn't we choose a low-fat product and choose a whole-fat product, for instance, say milk or yogurt or something like that. What are the benefits of those types of whole products and fats in our diet?
There are certain vitamins that you find in fat, the fat-soluble vitamins, and in particular vitamin A, vitamin E, vitamin K, which is a very important vitamin for keeping our blood vessels free of calcium, and then vitamin D, of course. So these are important fat-soluble vitamins that are removed when a product is rendered fat-free. So there are certain nutrients that you can only find in good quality fat. The other thing that we find, Zen, is that fat, which takes many different forms, when it comes from good forms like you describe, organic sources, those fats tend to be less inflammatory. We talk a lot about inflammation, it's kind of a revving up of our immune system as being the basis for many diseases that we confront over the course of our lifetime. And we know that healthy sources of fat can be very anti-inflammatory. If you look at olive oil, for example, or if you look at omega-3 fats from fatty fish or marine vegetables, very anti-inflammatory, as opposed to fats that come from some of those CAFO animals. The eggs that those animals produce are much more pro-inflammatory. So not only are there vitamins that you won't find in fat-free products, but the biology, the effects of those fats when well sourced can be very, very protective.
Yeah, and I'd like to mention also, if you are going to buy the whole fat products, that keep in mind another reason why they do need to be organic is because the chemicals such as glyphosate, atrazine, 2,4-D dicamba are going to collect in the fats, aren't they? So you're going to find some of the highest levels of these toxic chemicals in animal fats, like in breast milk, in their fats, in bone marrow, maybe even broths. So you do need to really look at making sure that those sources are organic. Isn't that what we've seen, is that these chemicals collect in the fats, correct?
Absolutely. And they will stay there for a long, long time. It is very hard to eliminate many of these environmental toxins once they accumulate to a large degree in our fat stores. So it's a terrific point that you're making.
Yeah, thank you. So the benefits of eating, oh, and I did want to mention in your webinar, you said that there was a 52% reduction of calcified arteries in the Dutch who ate butter, eggs, liver, cheese, because of you believe connected to this K2. Is there studies to show that the K2 is connected to this better health?
There's certainly a lot of research that supports vitamin K2 as an important vitamin to take the calcium that we eat in our diet and we absorb and place it where it needs to be in our bones. If we don't have enough vitamin K2, that calcium can end up in other places. And if you look at people with coronary artery disease or strokes, those people will have a fair amount of calcium built up in their blood vessels. And if those people aren't getting enough whole fat food sources, chances are they're not getting enough vitamin K2. And that may be one of the reasons that in this particular study, it was called the Rotterdam study, found that people who consume more of those whole unprocessed fat sources had a significant reduction and cardiovascular disease risk, which was one would not have predicted based on the fat, cholesterol, heart disease hypothesis.
Now, I've heard K2 is only available in the raw milks as well. Is that true, or is it available in homogenized and pasteurized milks?
You can find it in homogenized and pasteurized sources as well. A lot of the vitamin K2 in our bodies is actually produced by the bacteria in our gut. So you can get it both from whole fat sources.
Okay.
You can also get it from vitamin K that is produced into a vitamin K2 form by the bacteria in our gut. So this ecosystem in the gut plays an important role in converting some vitamin K to that particular form, which we then absorb.
So you could get it as a supplement? That would work?
Yes, you can get vitamin K2 as a supplement. And if somebody perhaps is a vegetarian, vegan, and maybe not getting enough K2 from other dietary sources, it can be taken in that way.
Okay. And of course, we would advise that you would discuss that with a doctor and not just start taking it, because it could offset other things going on in your body. Like you said, calcium is not as easily absorbed without the K2. I'm just, the gears are churning in my head because I've heard about the studies that say, there's children who drank plenty of milk and their calcium levels in their bones were actually lower, and then I'm thinking, well, maybe this is because the K2 wasn't in the milk. You know what I mean? Maybe it was skim milk or low fat milk. And so they're drinking all this calcium, but they don't have the K2 in order to process it. So they're not actually improving the calcium in their bones. I think different scenarios like that could be happening. Is that?
Yes, exactly.
Okay. So it's very, very important to know. Now, can we talk a little bit about the good fat sources in non-animal products? So what types of vegetables or other plant sources can we get good fat sources from?
Yeah, so if you look at avocados, terrific source of fat, and the fat in avocados is a lot like the fat that you see in olive oil, which is another superb source of fat. And those types of fats we call monounsaturated fats, which are very health promoting. If you look at nuts and seeds, and nuts like almonds, macadamia nuts, walnuts, if you look at chia seeds, flax seeds, those are all really superb sources of fat. Coconut oil, also a very good source of fat. Coconut oil for many years has been chastised because it does contain a lot of saturated fat. And again, this largely comes down to quality. And saturated fat from quality sources appears to be more health promoting than health undermining.
Yeah, it starts to make me wary of any new studies that say a particular oil is bad. I'm wondering, is it a competitor that's funding that study? Do you know what I mean? Wants their oil to all of a sudden be the brand new thing? You know what I mean? It really does make me very wary of what's going on in the food industry for marketing, because there are plenty of great things that are going on with coconut oil. I mean, you can use it as a body lotion, as an antibacterial, as you can pull the toxins out of your mouth with it. A lot of people do oil pulling. I've heard it helps with preventing Alzheimer's or different types of dementia. It's all kinds of great things for the brain. So can you say why these fats are important for the brain as well? Our children's brains are developing. I hear that really there's a lot of protein in the brain. Do these fats have a direct connection to the development of the brain?
They do indeed. If you look at the brain and if you look at the nervous system in general, Zen, it's about 70% fat by weight. Wow. And so our brains are predominantly fat. And the kinds of fats that you will find in the brain are largely omega-3s, particularly the DHA. Marine algae is a very good source of DHA for those that are vegetarian or vegan. Fatty fish for those that aren't, like salmon, sardines, anchovies, mackerel, trout, really good sources of these healthy fats that are fundamental to brain function. And we know that other fats like coconut oil, for example, is very good for brain health. And coconut oil and the what are called the medium chain triglycerides, the MCT, which is part of the coconut oil family, are very good sources of fuel for the brain. They get converted to these things called ketones. So there's a lot of research now in Alzheimer's and depression, looking at some of these foods as an important protector of brain function. So I think we're learning a lot. And it is a confusing landscape, Zen, for anyone, even for clinical people who follow this closely. It gets very confusing. And I always come back to the principles of if the food you're consuming, and in the example of fat, is coming from a whole unprocessed form,
Mm-hmm.
if the food that you're consuming was the food that generations before us tended to consume in higher quantities, in the absence of processing, then chances are we are better adapted as modern humans to consume those foods. And so most of the things that are confusing with fat, in retrospect, when you apply that lens, you can appreciate how problematic they might be, like margarine, like trans fats, like so many modern versions of fats that are more synthesized. And then so many of the animal products that you mentioned, which are from these concentrated, feedlot, are just in horrible conditions. And what we eat reflects what the animals we're consuming ate. So we know I think that's the lens through which I look at so much of what's probably the way to go when you're getting conflicting advice.
Yeah, that's a great point. I've heard from many different sources now. If we ate the way our ancestors ate, we would be fine.
Yes.
They did not eat from CAFOs. They did not eat with toxins sprayed all over their food. And they also did not eat vast amounts of meat. I mean, they had a small amount of meat once a week, and that was a treat. I went to China backpacking. I was 19 years old, and I was on a long hike. I mean, maybe 8 hours along I think it was the Jade River or the Yellow River, something like that, beautiful river. And I was very hungry, and I got to this very tiny house on the side of the cliff, and I really wanted protein. I really wanted chicken. So I asked for them for chicken, and there was a chicken running around, and they told me, "You catch it." In Chinese, they said, "You want it, you catch it." And I was like, oh no, they wanted to make it difficult for me to get it, right? Because they didn't want to kill the chicken. It's a source of eggs for them. So I was like, oh, all right, I'll just eat the eggs, But they didn't have animal fat as often, our ancestors, because it was a matter of survival, and they were much healthier in many ways. So I can really see that the benefit of looking at how our ancestors ate. I'm half Chinese, dairy's probably not one of the greatest things for me to have, especially my sister and, different people of Asian background. Dairy's not the greatest thing for them. And there's many different, ways we can look at how our ancestors ate. So I appreciate that you touch on that.
And the other thing that I would add, Zed, very quickly, pardon the interruption, is that I don't mean to suggest that low-fat nutritional principles can't be healthy. They most certainly can.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a matter of if you're eating more carbohydrate, that those carbohydrates come from whole, unprocessed forms, like vegetables, beans, legumes, whole grains. And so I don't in any way mean to imply that carbohydrates can't be healthy as part of a low-fat nutritional program. It's that most people will replace fat with unhealthier forms of carbohydrate. And it's those mixtures that really get you into trouble.
Right. So they have a low-fat yogurt, but then they have perhaps a croissant with it, something like that. So it
exactly. Or that low-fat yogurt has a lot of sugar in it and added fruit and sweeteners. And so in the end, you're not getting the fat benefits. And in addition, you're getting some of the disadvantages of those poor quality sugars and carbohydrates.
Right. Okay, great. Yeah. So you mentioned ketones, and I'm very interested in that. If you don't mind going into that just for a minute or two, because right now my mom's diabetic and we're doing a low carb, trying to do no carb, but low carb. And within 3 days of that, her blood sugar levels went down 20 points. The carbs and the sugars really have such a huge impact. And my understanding is because the body burns the sugars and basically your muscle tone instead of the fats. Can you explain the ketones and the process of how your body shifts over to ketones? And can you just incorporate coconut oil into your diet and build up those ketones? How does that work?
Yeah, all great questions, Zen. So there are a couple of ways that a person can make ketones. Ketones are a form of fuel that we make one of two ways. One is if we do not have enough nutrition, where we're deprived, and what our bodies do if they're not getting enough energy to maintain normal physiologic function is that the body will start to break down your fat. And most of us have fat stores that can sustain us. That fat is broken down into what we call ketones. And these ketones, like sugar, circulate throughout the body, and every cell can use that as a fuel. So it becomes a replacement for sugar or glucose.
Okay.
And ketones burn very clean. If we were an automobile, a ketone would be like super unleaded. This is a very clean fuel. So when we burn it, metabolize it, we don't produce as many byproducts, free radicals, these oxidative free radicals that we talk a lot about. And the brain loves ketones. It gobbles it up, and it's a very clean fuel. Now, the other way to make ketones is to really cut down on your carbohydrates. And you have to cut them down quite a bit, usually to less than 50 grams a day. Most Americans consume 200 to 300 grams a day. And you have to eat more fat because the ketones are produced by the fat. So as people can bring that carbohydrate level down, they consume more of these healthier sources of fat. Generally, within a few days, you will start to produce ketones. You can measure that with a blood finger stick like you would a sugar. There are breath analyzers that can measure ketones. It's a super fuel. And a lot of the research would suggest that many health issues can significantly improve with ketogenic diets.
Yes. In fact, you just read an article that said that diabetes can actually be cured
Yes.
by low carb ketogenic diets. I mean, and so this is very hopeful. My mom's been on diabetic medication for years. And so how do you test? Where do you get a test for ketones? Can you just go to your pharmacy, or do you have to get it from your doctor?
Yeah, so you don't need a prescription to get the strips or a ketone meter, like a blood sugar meter. You can buy those without a prescription. At most drugstores will sell this.
Okay.
The strips can be quite expensive. It can cost up to $1 to get one ketone strip. Now, in my experience, and this just speaks to how crazy our health system is, while ketogenic diets can be very health promoting and can reverse diseases like diabetes, insurers often won't pay for a meter or a ketone strip in the same way that they will pay for a glucose meter or a glucose strip. So there can be out-of-pocket expenses.
Right.
The breath analyzer is called Ketonix, Ketonix. I have no vested interest in the company. I do own a Ketonix, and I often recommend it for someone who's thinking about a ketone diet, a ketogenic diet. Here you measure with breath, and you can use it repeatedly, indefinitely. So it's a more economical way to go. It's not quite as precise as the blood measurement, but it's a very good alternative. It may run about $100, $120, but you can use it for the rest of your life.
Right. Okay. Very interesting. And you can get that at a pharmacy too, or online.
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 I don't know if most pharmacies probably don't carry the Ketonix breath analyzer.
Okay, great. Well, that's very good to know. And so you're saying 50 grams of carbs instead of 200 grams, on average. And that would mean what we're doing right now is eating lots of protein, lots of vegetables, low sugar fruits, right? Seeds, nuts, things like that. And Yeah, so look more into, if you're interested about this, you want to find out, this segment wasn't about the ketogenic diet, but you can look it up, Google it, look up, good resources, information about that. And thank you very much, Dr. Pettus, for talking to us about fats. It's been very confusing what's been going on in this marketing industry of food and all kinds of food-like products. But we appreciate you taking the time to address this with us, and for all of the education that you're giving our health practitioner. We really appreciate that, because when we go to doctors who know about what's going on in the food industry, it's a huge relief off our shoulders. We don't feel so alone, and we don't feel like we're struggling as much. We feel like we have a partner in our children's health. So thank you very, very much for addressing these incredibly important issues in our food supply right now.
You're welcome, Zen. Thanks for having me. Peace.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mark. Take care.
Take care.